The Galactic Military Academy floated like a metallic leviathan against the backdrop of stars, its imposing structure a testament to humanity's determination to conquer the stars. The facility orbited a distant exoplanet far enough from Earth that cadets couldn't look back at their home with nostalgia, but close enough to other inhabited systems that the threat of hostile encounters remained constant. Kian watched the stars through the small viewport in his quarters, his reflection staring back at him with determined eyes that held the weight of his family's legacy. "Cadet Sullivan," the automated voice announced over the intercom, "report to Training Block E for your next assessment." Kian straightened his uniform, pushing down the anxiety that threatened to surface. As the son of Commander James Sullivan, one of the most decorated officers in the Galactic Fleet, expectations weighed on him like gravity on a high-mass planet. He had excelled in academic tests, combat simulations, and tactical exercises. But the real challenges at the Academy were the live encounters. These tests determined who would graduate and who would wash out, who had what it took to face the unknown threats lurking in the vast darkness of space. The corridors of the Academy were clinically pristine, the metallic walls reflecting the harsh artificial light. Fellow cadets moved with purpose, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. Everyone knew about the assessment chambers, the cells where cadets faced live specimens collected from across known space. These creatures were not simulations or holograms, but real breathing predators with claws, fangs, and often incomprehensible alien biologies designed by evolution to kill. "Sullivan," a voice called from behind him. Kian turned to see Aisha Nadir, his closest friend at the Academy, and one of the few cadets who had consistently outperformed him. Her dark eyes held concern. "Is today your Apex trial?" Kian nodded, maintaining a composed facade despite the churning in his stomach. "Block E. They've been tight-lipped about which species." "That's unusual." Aisha frowned. "They typically brief us on the basic biology at least." "Maybe they want to test pure adaptive response," Kian suggested, though he shared her unease. "No preparation, just instinct and training." "Maybe," Aisha said, not sounding convinced. "But be careful, something feels off about this one." The massive doors to Training Block E slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, a team of technicians and scientists bustled around monitoring stations, their attention focused on screens displaying biological readouts and security feeds. At the center of it all stood Dr. Elias Vaughn, the Academy's head of xenobiology and combat adaptation. His tall, gaunt frame and piercing eyes gave him the appearance of a predator himself, one that hunted with intellect rather than physical strength. "Cadet Sullivan." Dr. Vaughn's voice was cool and analytical, as if Kian were just another specimen to be studied. "Right on time. Excellent." "Sir," Kian saluted crisply, "reporting for assessment trial as ordered." Dr. Vaughn nodded, gesturing to a sealed door at the far end of the room. "Your assessment chamber is prepared. Today's trial will test not just your combat abilities, but your perceptive skills and psychological resilience." "What species am I facing, sir?" Kian asked, maintaining military protocol despite his growing sense of unease. A thin smile crossed the scientist's face. "That's part of the assessment, Cadet. Identification, adaptation, survival. The 3 pillars of interspecies combat." Before Kian could question further, one of the technicians approached Dr. Vaughn and whispered something in his ear. The scientist's expression remained unchanged, but Kian noticed a subtle tension in his shoulders. "Proceed to the chamber, Cadet Sullivan," Dr. Vaughn ordered, turning away. "The trial begins in 5 minutes." The assessment chamber was a sterile white room approximately 10 meters square with a ceiling height of 4 meters. The walls were reinforced with durasteel and equipped with numerous sensors and cameras to record every moment of the trial. A weapons rack on one wall held basic defensive tools, a shock baton, a tactical shield, and various restraints designed to subdue rather than kill. Academy policy: dictated preservation of specimens whenever possible. Kian took stock of his surroundings, mentally preparing strategies for different combat scenarios. The chamber had minimal furniture, just a small cot, a sink, and a reinforced waste disposal unit. Whatever creature they introduced would have limited places to hide, which was both an advantage and a concern. Some predators thrived in open confrontation, while others preferred ambush tactics. "Commencing trial in 60 seconds," announced the disembodied voice of the control system. "Stand by for specimen introduction." Kian moved to the center of the room, assuming a defensive stance. His heart rate increased, but years of training kept his breathing steady and his mind clear. He focused on the sealed panel in the wall that would soon open to admit whatever creature the Academy had selected for his trial. Specimen introduction in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The panel slid open, revealing a dark aperture. Kian braced himself, muscles tense and ready to react to whatever emerged. Seconds passed, nothing appeared. "Specimen released," the system announced. Yet the aperture remained empty. No creature emerged. Kian maintained his stance, eyes scanning the opening and the room. Sometimes the predators were small or could move with unexpected speed. But as seconds stretched into a minute, confusion began to replace vigilance. "Control, is there a malfunction with the release mechanism?" Kian called out, knowing the observation team could hear him. No response came. The communication system remained silent, though Kian knew the scientists would be monitoring closely. This had to be part of the test. Perhaps the creature was invisible or could manipulate perception. He reached for the shock baton on the weapons rack, the weight of it reassuring in his hand. "If this is part of the assessment, acknowledge." Kian tried again, sweeping the baton in an arc before him, hoping to make contact with any invisible threat. Still no response. But then Kian felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a sense of being watched that prickled the hairs on the back of his neck. Years of training had honed his instincts, and those instincts were now screaming that he wasn't alone in the chamber. "I know you're here," he said, addressing the unseen presence, "whatever you are." From his peripheral vision, Kian caught a flicker of movement near the ceiling. He spun baton raised, but saw nothing. The sensation of being observed intensified, like the weight of a predator's gaze just before it strikes. Hours passed. Kian remained vigilant, occasionally catching those same flickers of movement, but never making visual or physical contact with the creature. Fatigue began to set in his muscles, protesting the constant state of readiness. Standard assessment trials lasted no more than 2 hours. Yet, there was no indication that this one was approaching its conclusion. "Control request status update." Kian called, his frustration mounting. "Has the specimen been released or not?" The silence from the observation team was becoming more disturbing than the mysterious presence in the room. Protocol dictated regular communication during trials, especially if complications arose. Something was very wrong. As if in response to his thoughts, the main door to the chamber suddenly slid open. Dr. Vaughn stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 security officers with weapons drawn. "Cadet Sullivan." Dr. Vaughn's voice was tight with tension. "Step out of the chamber immediately." "Sir, what about the specimen?" Kian asked, not lowering his guard. "That's what we need to determine," the scientist replied cryptically. "Outside, now." In the control room, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Technicians moved frantically between monitoring stations, their faces pale with concern. Dr. Vaughn led Kian to a central display that showed thermal and motion sensor readings of the assessment chamber. "Do you see it?" the scientist asked, pointing to the empty screen. "According to every sensor we have, there is nothing in that chamber besides you. No heat signature, no motion detection, nothing on any spectrum we can monitor." "That's impossible," Kian said, frowning. "Something was in there with me. I could sense it." "That's what concerns us," Dr. Vaughn admitted. "We introduced an apex predator from the Cygnus system, a cloaking hunter that can manipulate light around its body, but it still shows up on thermal and other sensors." He paused, his scientific detachment momentarily cracking to reveal genuine worry. It's simply gone. Could it have escaped? Kian asked the implications, sending a chill down his spine. The academy housed thousands of cadets, most of whom would be unprepared for an encounter with a loose predator. That's what we're trying to determine, Dr. Vaughn said, his gaze returning to the monitors. The chamber is completely sealed. Nothing should be able to enter or exit except through the controlled access points, all of which have been under constant surveillance. A technician approached, handing Dr. Vaughn a data pad. The scientist's expression darkened as he reviewed the information. We've initiated full containment protocols, he announced to the room. All cadets are to return to their quarters immediately. Security teams will conduct a level-by-level search of the entire facility. He turned to Kian. You'll need to be debriefed thoroughly. If you sensed the creature's presence when our technology couldn't detect it, that information could be crucial. Kian nodded, though a nagging suspicion had begun to form in his mind. The timing, the unusual nature of the trial, the lack of communication, something didn't add up. The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. The academy locked down completely, with armed security teams sweeping every corridor, vent, and chamber. Kian underwent a battery of tests and debriefings recounting every detail of his experience in the assessment chamber multiple times. Medical staff examined him thoroughly, looking for any sign of interaction with the missing predator. It was during one of these examinations that Kian noticed something strange. The medical officer, a woman he'd never seen before, was taking an unusual interest in his neurological readings. What exactly are you looking for? Kian asked as she studied the brain scan results with intense concentration. The woman glanced up, momentarily startled. Standard protocol for post-assessment evaluation, she replied too quickly. Especially after contact with unknown species. But there was no contact, Kian pointed out. That's the whole issue, isn't it? The creature vanished. The medical officer didn't respond, instead making a notation on her datapad before abruptly concluding the examination. As she left, Kian caught a glimpse of what she'd written. Subject shows elevated parietal lobe activity. Consistent with predicted pattern. Proceed to phase 2. That night, confined to his quarters like all other cadets during the facility-wide search, Kian couldn't shake the growing sense that there was more to this situation than a missing predator. He accessed his personal terminal, bypassing the standard cadet access limitations with hacking skills he'd picked up but never reported to his superiors. If his suspicions were correct, he needed information that wouldn't be made readily available. He found it in a restricted research database, a project file labeled Perception Threshold Testing. The file was heavily encrypted, but Kian managed to extract fragments. Human evolutionary disadvantage when facing advanced sensory adaptations of apex predators, potential for enhanced perceptive capabilities through controlled exposure, subjects unaware of actual test parameters to ensure authentic neurological responses. Kian sat back, the pieces falling into place. There had never been any physical creature in that chamber with him. The test wasn't about combat or survival. It was about perception. They were testing whether humans could develop the ability to sense predators beyond normal sensory input, a sort of sixth sense that might give them an edge in interspecies combat. A soft beep from his terminal alerted him to a new message. It was from Aisha, sent through a secure channel they'd established for private communications. Something's wrong. They've taken 3 other cadets who completed Apex trials recently. Official story is extended evaluation, but security footage shows them being escorted to the restricted research wing. Be careful. Meet me in Maintenance Sector 7B if you can get out. Kian deleted the message immediately. If his room was under surveillance, which seemed increasingly likely, he couldn't risk showing that he was suspicious. He needed to play along until he understood exactly what was happening. The academy remained in lockdown for 3 more days, with increasingly frustrated cadets confined to quarters except for tightly supervised mealtimes. Kian observed gathering snippets of information from conversations and system access where possible. The official story remained that a dangerous specimen had escaped and not been recaptured, but he noticed that the security teams were focusing their searches less on the general facility and more on specific cadets. On the fourth day, Dr. Vaughn personally came to Kian's quarters. "Cadet Sullivan," the scientist said, his tone carefully neutral, "we've detected some anomalies in your post-assessment medical scans. We'd like to run some additional tests in the research wing." Kian maintained a facade of cooperative confusion. "Of course, sir. Is there something wrong?" "On the contrary," Dr. Vaughn replied, a hint of excitement bleeding through his professional demeanor. "You may have experienced something quite remarkable during your assessment, something that could be of significant value to the fleet." Kian followed Dr. Vaughn through corridors that were conspicuously empty of other cadets or regular staff. The security officers accompanying them were not the standard Academy guards, but wore the insignia of the Scientific Research Division, a branch known for its less restricted ethical guidelines. The research wing was a section of the Academy that few cadets ever saw. Unlike the utilitarian design of the training facilities, these laboratories featured cutting-edge technology and comfort. Dr. Vaughn led Kian to a room that looked more like a high-end medical suite than a military facility. "Please make yourself comfortable." The scientist gestured to a reclining chair in the center of the room. "These tests are non-invasive but comprehensive. We'll be mapping your neural activity while simulating various sensory scenarios." As Kian reluctantly sat in the chair, he noticed other scientists gathering behind an observation window. Among them was the medical officer who had examined him earlier, now deep in conversation with a tall, imposing man whose uniform bore the insignia of Fleet Intelligence. "Before we begin," Kian said, stalling for time as he assessed his options, "may I ask what exactly you're looking for?" "What anomalies were in my medical scans?" Dr. Vaughn hesitated, then apparently decided that some explanation would facilitate cooperation. "Your brain showed activity patterns that suggest you were perceiving something in that chamber despite the absence of any detectable stimuli. It's a phenomenon we've theorized might exist in humans, but haven't been able to conclusively document until now." "You're saying I was sensing something that wasn't there?" Kian asked, feigning confusion, while inwardly confirming his suspicions. "Not exactly." Dr. Vaughn's eyes lit with scientific enthusiasm. "We believe you were sensing something that was there but shouldn't have been perceptible to normal human senses. A breakthrough in human evolutionary potential, possibly accelerated by the challenges of interstellar expansion and contact with non-terrestrial life forms." As the scientist spoke, technicians began attaching neural monitors to Kian's temples and wrists. He noticed that the restraints on the chair, while currently open, could be quickly activated to immobilize him. "And the other cadets?" Kian asked, watching Dr. Vaughn's reaction carefully. "The ones who've been brought here for extended evaluation." A flicker of surprise crossed the scientist's face before his expression smoothed. "You're well-informed, Cadet Sullivan. Yes, there are others showing similar promising results. You're part of something extraordinary, the next evolution of human combat capability. You never released any predator into my chamber, did you?" Kian pressed, dropping the pretense. "This whole scenario, the missing creature, the lockdown, it's all part of your experiment." Dr. Vaughn's smile faded, replaced by a calculating look. "Your perceptiveness continues to impress. No, there was no physical entity in that chamber. But what you sensed was real. A projected energy field designed to mimic the neural signature of a predator species. Something that should have been impossible for you to detect." He leaned closer. "Don't you see the significance? If we can develop this ability, train it, enhance it, humans would never again be at a sensory disadvantage against alien species. We could detect threats before they strike, sense ambushes before walking into them. And the Academy leadership approved experimenting on cadets without consent." Kian asked, his tone hardening as he surreptitiously loosened one of the neural monitors. "The Academy serves the fleet. Dr. Vaughn replied dismissively. And the fleet understands that progress requires taking certain liberties with standard protocols, particularly when the subjects are already committed to serving the greater good. Before Kian could respond, the door to the laboratory slid open. A security officer entered, his expression urgent as he approached Dr. Vaughn and whispered something in his ear. The scientist's face darkened with anger. "Impossible," he hissed. "How many?" "All of them, sir," the officer replied, loud enough for Kian to hear. "The observation wing is completely empty. No sign of forced entry or exit." Dr. Vaughn turned to Kian with sudden suspicion. This conversation was a distraction, wasn't it? "Who are you working with?" Kian maintained an expression of genuine confusion, which wasn't entirely feigned. He had planned to find a way to escape and locate Aisha, but it sounded like someone had already freed the other test subjects. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility, the lights shifting to emergency red. The automated announcement system activated. Security breach detected in research sector. All personnel implement containment protocol Theta. This is not a drill. Dr. Vaughn cursed, gesturing to the security officers. "Lock him down and join the response team. Whatever's happening, we can't lose control of this project." As one of the officers moved to activate the chair's restraints, the room plunged into darkness. The backup generators should have engaged immediately, but the seconds stretched with no restoration of power. In the darkness, Kian heard the sound of struggle followed by the distinct thud of bodies hitting the floor. When the emergency lighting finally activated, casting the room in a dim red glow, Kian found himself alone with 3 unconscious security officers and no sign of Dr. Vaughn. "We need to move," a voice said from the doorway. Aisha stood there dressed in tactical gear that definitely wasn't standard issue for cadets. "There's a short window before the secondary systems reboot and lock down the entire section." "What's happening?" Kian asked quickly, removing the remaining monitors and rising from the chair. "How did you—" "Later." Aisha cut him off, tossing him a sidearm. "We're not the only ones who realized something was wrong with these assessments. There's a whole network within the academy. Cadet staff, even some officers who've been gathering evidence about these unauthorized experiments." Kian followed her into the corridor, where the emergency lighting cast eerie shadows. The other test subject, "Secure," Aisha replied cryptically. "This goes deeper than just perception testing, Kian. They've been experimenting with various enhancements across multiple cadet groups. Some physical, some cognitive, all without consent or oversight. They moved through the research wing, encountering surprisingly little resistance. Most of the security forces seem to have been drawn elsewhere in the facility. There's been a coordinated effort to expose what's happening here," Aisha explained as they navigated the corridors. "Today was just the trigger point. Information drops have been sent to Fleet Command, the Planetary Council, even some civilian news networks. The Academy leadership won't be able to bury this." "And Dr. Vaughn?" Kian asked, checking around a corner before proceeding. Aisha's expression hardened. "He's not the mastermind. Just an ambitious scientist who saw an opportunity. The real architects are higher up in fleet intelligence, people who decided that developing the next evolution of human soldiers was worth any ethical compromise." They reached a service elevator that descended to the lower maintenance levels. As the doors closed, Aisha finally relaxed slightly. "How did you know?" Kian asked. "About what they were doing with the Apex trials." "I didn't at first," she admitted. "I started noticing patterns after my own assessment, subtle differences in how certain cadets were treated, afterward restricted areas of the medical database that seemed to correlate with specific trial types. Then, I found others who had noticed similar discrepancies." The elevator stopped at Maintenance Sector 7B, opening into a sprawling area of machinery and support systems that kept the academy functioning. To Kian's surprise, the space had been converted into a makeshift command center. Dozens of cadets and several staff members worked at terminals or gathered in discussion groups. On large screens, security footage showed various parts of the academy, including detention areas where several high-ranking officers were being held. "Welcome to the Resistance," Aisha said with a grim smile. "Turns out we're not the only ones who had concerns about how the academy operates." A tall cadet whom Kian recognized as Marcus Way from Advanced Tactical Training approached them. "Sullivan, good to see you made it out." He turned to Aisha. "We've secured the main communications array. Transmissions to Fleet Command confirmed. No response yet, but they've received the data package." "What happens now?" Kian asked, looking around at the operation that had apparently been developing right under the noses of the Academy leadership. "Now we hold position and wait for the official response," Marcus replied. "Either Fleet Command acknowledges the violations and institutes reforms, or they were complicit all along, and we have just painted targets on our backs," Aisha finished. Kian processed the enormity of the situation sinking in. "So this wasn't just about breaking me out. This is a full-scale exposure of systemic abuses." "The Apex Predator experiments were just the tip of the iceberg," Marcus explained, leading them to a central display. "Look at this." The screen showed documentation of dozens of unauthorized experimental programs conducted over the past 5 years. Genetic modifications disguised as vaccination programs, psychological conditioning, embedded in standard training simulations, and neural implants installed during routine medical procedures. They've been using the academy as a testing ground for the next generation of enhanced soldiers, Aisha said quietly, treating cadets as disposable test subjects rather than the future of the fleet. "And no one noticed until now?" Kian asked incredulously. "People noticed," Marcus corrected him. "They just disappeared, were discredited, or bought off. But eventually enough of us connected the dots and started building this network." The next few hours were a tense waiting game. The Resistance monitored Academy systems and communications while preparing contingency plans. Kian learned that similar actions had been coordinated at other fleet training facilities across multiple systems, all triggered to expose the truth simultaneously. 6 hours after the initial breach, the response finally came. A Fleet Command vessel entered orbit around the Academy station, and a secure transmission was received in the Resistance Command Center. "This is Admiral Helena Chen," the stern-faced woman on the screen announced. "Under authority granted by the Unified Fleet Charter, I am assuming direct control of all Academy operations, pending a full investigation into the allegations brought forward by Cadet and staff whistleblowers." A collective breath of relief passed through the command center, though Kian noticed that Aisha and Marcus remained tense. "All cadets and non-implicated staff are to stand down," the Admiral continued. "Security forces are being deployed to secure research facilities and detain those named in the evidence provided. Anyone who participated in unauthorized experimentation on Academy personnel will face military tribunal." As the transmission ended, Marcus turned to the gathered Resistance members. "It's a start," he said cautiously. "But this doesn't end here. The systems that allowed this to happen are still in place. And we don't know how deep the corruption goes," Aisha added. "Admiral Chen may be sincere, but there are bound to be others in Fleet Command who knew and approved these programs." Kian found himself at a crossroads. His lifelong dream had been to follow in his father's footsteps, to serve with distinction in the fleet. But now he understood that the institutions he'd revered were fundamentally flawed, capable of betraying the very principles they claimed to uphold. "So what's our next move?" he asked, making his decision. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded with approval. "We ensure accountability, document everything, protect the evidence, and make sure this investigation can't be quietly closed and buried." "And the abilities they were trying to develop?" Kian asked, thinking of the strange perception he had experienced in that chamber. The enhancements they were experimenting with. "That's a question for later," Aisha said. "First, we need to make sure science serves humanity, not the other way around." Fleet security forces arrived within the hour, led by officers who wore the distinct insignia of the Inspector General's division. the branch responsible for internal investigations. Their commander, a battle-scarred veteran named Colonel Takeda, met with the resistance leadership, including Kian, Aisha, and Marcus. "You've opened Pandora's box," the colonel told them bluntly in the converted maintenance bay. "Fleet Command is in chaos. Some are calling for your court-martial for mutiny. Others are demanding immediate shutdown of all Academy facilities pending investigation." "And where do you stand, Colonel?" Marcus asked directly. The weathered officer's expression remained neutral. "I follow orders. Current orders are to secure this facility, protect evidence, and ensure no one who might be implicated escapes before questioning." He paused, then added with subtle emphasis, "Those are orders I'm entirely comfortable executing thoroughly." Over the following days, the true scope of the experimental program became clear. Nearly a third of all cadets had been unwitting test subjects in one form or another. The Apex Predator Perception Tests were among the less invasive procedures. Others involved genetic modifications, experimental combat enhancers, and even attempts at creating telepathic connections between squad members. Dr. Vaughn was apprehended, trying to flee the station in a research vessel. Under interrogation, he revealed that the programs had been authorized at the highest levels of fleet intelligence, justified as necessary to prepare humanity for encounters with increasingly dangerous alien species. "We're falling behind," he insisted, during a recorded statement that was leaked to the resistance. "Every expedition into new systems reveals species with evolutionary advantages we can't match. Enhanced perception, natural armor, biological weapons systems. How long before we encounter something we can't defeat with just technology and tactics?" 1 week after the initial exposure, Admiral Chen called a general assembly of all Academy personnel. Standing on the central podium of the main auditorium, with armed guards from her personal security detail flanking her, she addressed the gathered cadets and staff. "The violation of trust that occurred within these walls is unforgivable." She began, her voice carrying the weight of authority and genuine anger. "Those responsible will face justice. But more importantly, we must rebuild our institutions to ensure this can never happen again." She announced sweeping reforms, independent oversight of all research involving personnel, transparent reporting structures, and a complete reevaluation of the Academy's purpose and methods. "The goal of this institution is not to create perfect weapons," she stated firmly, "but to train thinking, ethical soldiers who can protect humanity while embodying its best values. We lost sight of that distinction, and many of you paid the price." After the assembly, Kian found himself summoned to a private meeting with the Admiral. He entered the commandeered office cautiously, still unsure how much to trust this apparent intervention from Fleet Command. "Cadet Sullivan." Admiral Chen greeted him, dismissing her aides with a gesture. When they were alone, she studied him with penetrating eyes. "You were central to exposing this situation, yet your file indicates no previous disciplinary issues or signs of dissent." "I believed in the Academy, Admiral," Kian replied honestly. "When I realized what was happening, that belief required me to act." She nodded slowly, a principled response. "Your father would be proud." The mention of his father caught Kian off guard. "You knew Commander Sullivan." "We served together before he was lost on the Proxima expedition," she confirmed. "He had the same unwavering moral compass. It's what made him both an excellent officer and occasionally a thorn in Command's side." She rose, moving to the viewport that looked out on the stars. "We stand at a critical juncture. Cadet, the fleet and the Academy can emerge from this crisis stronger, more ethical, and better prepared to face the challenges ahead, but only if the right people lead that transformation." "With respect, Admiral," Kian said carefully, "aren't you part of the command structure that allowed these abuses to occur?" Rather than taking offense, Chen smiled slightly. "A fair question. I was appointed to Fleet Command 3 months ago, after serving as Inspector General for the Outer Colonies. My reputation for ethical oversight is precisely why certain factions wanted me far from Earth and the Central Systems." She turned back to him. I've been conducting my own quiet investigation since my appointment. Your resistance movement accelerated what would have taken me years to uncover through official channels. Kian considered this. So what happens now? Now I offer you a choice, Admiral Chen said directly. Return to cadet training, complete your education under the reformed system, and pursue a traditional fleet career. Or join a special task force I'm forming to investigate similar abuses throughout fleet operations. It won't be safe. It won't be sanctioned by all of Fleet Command, and it certainly won't be easy. Why me? Kian asked. Because you've demonstrated both the perceptions abilities they were trying to enhance and the ethical foundation to use such abilities responsibly, she replied. And because I need people I can trust. People who have proven they'll stand for what's right even when it's difficult. Kian thought of his father, of the legacy he'd always sought to honor. He thought of the cadets who had been experimented on without their knowledge, and of the others across fleet facilities who might still be unwitting test subjects. When do we start? He asked. Admiral Chen's expression remained serious, but approval showed in her eyes. We already have. This conversation is the beginning. In the days that followed, Kian worked with Aisha Marcus and others from the Resistance to compile comprehensive documentation of everything they had discovered. Admiral Chen assembled a team of trusted officers and specialists preparing for a broader investigation that would extend beyond the academy. Dr. Vaughn and several other scientists faced military tribunal along with academy officials who had enabled the experiments. Some higher-ranking fleet officers were quietly removed from command, though Kian suspected that many involved at the highest levels would never face full accountability. The perception abilities that the experiments had sought to develop remained a subject of intense interest. Tests confirmed that Kian and several other cadets had indeed developed a heightened sense that allowed them to detect threats outside normal sensory ranges, a potentially valuable skill, but one that had been pursued through unethical means. They wanted weapons, but they created whistleblowers instead, Aisha remarked, as she and Kian prepared to depart the academy on Admiral Chen's vessel. The station that had been their home and battlefield now receded in the viewport, its future uncertain as reforms took shape. The irony is that they might have achieved their goals through ethical research and voluntary participation, Kian replied. They just couldn't see past their own arrogance and expediency. Marcus joined them at the viewport. The real test will be what happens next. Will these abilities be developed responsibly with proper oversight and consent, or will the same programs just go deeper underground? That's why our work isn't finished, Kian said, thinking of Admiral Chen's task force and the challenges ahead. They dropped an apex predator into my cell and couldn't find it afterward. They never realized that the real apex predators were the institutions they'd created, systems that devoured ethics and accountability in the name of progress. As the academy disappeared from view, replaced by the vast starfield of possibilities, Kian made a silent promise to his father's memory. He would not just follow the legacy of the past, but forge a new one where humanity's reach for the stars would not come at the cost of its soul. The vessel accelerated to faster than light speed, carrying Kian and his allies toward their next challenge. The apex predator experiments had ended, but the hunt for truth had just begun.